right, good evening, everyone. We have our official start tonight. Welcome. I am Leslie Rubin. I am the president of the Federation Board, and sitting with me tonight is Dr. Marc Swatez, our new Chief Executive Officer. Marc, welcome.
Thank you.
So before we get started tonight, I wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of what's come together to make this all happen tonight. I want to thank people like Andrea and Jeff and Michael and Josh and Gigi, who's here with us tonight, and all the many people who made this event possible. So thank you very much. Also, permit me to take a minute or two to tell you a little bit about my understanding of Marc. Marc is an individual who's very caring, who's very thoughtful. He's also an individual who has the reputation of being very calm and very focused under conditions of intense challenge or in a crisis, something that we should all admire. He has broad experience. He's been successfully fundraising for many years. He's conducted several capital campaigns, and an important fact is he's multilingual. Marc speaks the language of synagogues, federations, social service agencies, universities, and consultants. So we are lucky to have him. His experience, however, is gathered through his graduate faculty member of being a part of Spertus. He's a former CEO of the ARC in Chicago, where I can assure you he did a phenomenal job. He doubled their fundraising effort. And when I say doubled, I mean it went from the low $3 million up towards the $7 million range. So it's a significant doubling. He also, again, operated a very successful capital campaign while he was there. He's been executive director of two synagogues, one in Illinois and one in Virginia. And he's had federation experience in Richmond, Virginia. Marc, you and I are creating an ambitious plan to support Jewish agencies to figure out how we're going to promote inter and intra-agency collaboration and how we're going to begin to address some of the physical needs on this campus, in particular the campus buildings. You've already begun rebranding our talking points, you've organized teams, and you are working very well in terms of rationalizing our strategy. So tell me a little bit about how you approach relationships and how some of the other pieces here.
Sure, I do think I think the relationships is the key word. Since I got here, really, it's been a listening tour. Meeting with all sorts of different members of this community, spending time with you, other officers, and my counterparts across the different organizations. So speaking with the JCC and JCRC, speaking with Hastings Hebrew Academy and Hooverwood and JFS and all the different synagogues, really trying to find out where everyone else is in this community and what everyone wants, what's their mission. Because I think what this community has always had in the past and what it needs to have, continue to have for the future is a shared vision, a shared mission as to where we're going to go as the Indianapolis Jewish community.
Okay, well, thank you, Marc. Tonight, for everybody's benefit, we have a film that we're going to be sharing with you, which is an interview of Marc by Irwin Levin. That'll be following shortly. It'll talk about some particularly hot topics within the Jewish community. We also have offered you an opportunity to submit questions. If you haven't done prior to this event, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat. We have Gigi who is monitoring that, and will feed those questions to us. Marc, before we jump into the segment, however, tell us about your initial impression of Indianapolis.
It's wonderful. I mean, really, everyone has been just so kind. I've had the opportunity to, people have welcomed me to their homes. People have come to meet me here. I've had a tour of, the restaurants of Indianapolis. I didn't realize what a foodie town this is. There's actually some really wonderful food around here, and I've had far too much of it already. And so the doors have been open, and I think what's really impressed me is how open people are. They're really willing to share their opinions, all positive, really, all positive about what this community is and where it could be in the future. It's really been quite extraordinary to hear how supportive everyone is to me and to the Federation as we move forward in taking a leadership role.
Well, Marc is no stranger to Jewish communal life. He also has a Midwestern values, having spent the vast majority of his life in the Midwest. And his family actually has a deep connection with the Indianapolis community. So I promised the weather's actually going to get nicer here in Indianapolis. How about, as you said, the foodie town? What's one of your favorite restaurants right now?
Seasons 52.
Seasons 52. Excellent choice. That's wonderful to hear. And by the way, for those in the audience that know me, I can tell you I am absolutely delighted that we have Marc on board. He's been a wonderful asset, and I continue to enjoy working with him. And as I mentioned before, last week, Marc sat down with Irwin Levin for a good discussion. This part I'm actually going to read a little bit because I want to make sure that I do Irwin justice. Irwin is a former Federation officer and board member, a former chairman of Israel Bonds in Indianapolis. He's the managing partner of Cohen and Malad law firm and has received several honors and awards for his work. In 1996, and frankly, I think I was on the JCRC board at that point, so I remember this, Irwin became active in first class action case to be filed with the United States against the Swiss banks on behalf of Holocaust survivors. He and other lawyers from Cohen and Malad took a hands-on approach in both the factual investigation of archived materials stored by the U.S. National Archives and the legal work before the court. In 1997, the Swiss bank litigation was consolidated before the U.S. District Court judge, who appointed an executive committee composed of 10 lawyers around the nation to manage the litigation. Irwin was one of that 10 chosen. Irwin also played a significant role in the lengthy negotiations, which culminated in a $1.25 billion settlement presented to the court. There's much, much more about Irwin, but the thing is that he's never let up. He continues to fight for all of us. And I want to thank Irwin because your commitment as a Jewish leader, a donor, and a volunteer to our organization is invaluable. So thank you for sitting down with Marc. And lastly, I want to thank you all for being here tonight, for submitting your questions. Again, if you have any during the session, please enter them into the chat.
Good morning, Marc.
Good morning, Irwin. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. And I got to tell you, this is one beautiful facility. We're sitting here inside Craft Commons in Hooverwood, and I had not been here before, and it is beautiful.
It really is. They did a wonderful job.
I want to thank Evan Lubline for making this available for us. It really is terrific.
I have amazing colleagues and partners in this community, yeah.
Well, Marc, before we get started, I want to just wish you a mazel tov. I understand that your daughter got engaged last night.
She did. Thank you. Yes.
It's certainly a nice way to kick this off.
It's a wonderful thing. It's my first engagement. It's great.
Good.
Yeah.
Mazel tov. So, Marc, I think first thing everybody wants to know is, who are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your background.
All right. Well, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors on my mom's side. My grandpa was taken to Kristallnacht and let go. They spent the war as German nationals living in England, which was a whole different kind of experience. My mom was born in England, obviously, and so on my mom's side, I'm actually first-generation American. On my dad's side, my grandfather was born in Russia. What we always said was Russia, but which just recently I learned is actually Ukraine. So my father we have a Ukrainian background, and my dad was born in Minneapolis, and my parents got married in the early 60s. I'm the first person in my family to go to college, first one to graduate college. So got a lot of firsts going on there. I have one sister. We grew up together in Minnesota in a very, very close family. We were Midwesterners all the way with my cousins, and it was a great, really an idyllic childhood. I was really, very, very fortunate. I went to Drake University. I went to Northwestern University where I got my PhD. My wife, Elise, I met at Camp Vermont, Wisconsin, where we started dating there. She is a Skokie girl. She's from Chicago originally, and we have 3 kids, Joelle, Josh, and Micah. Joelle got engaged yesterday. She lives in Chicago with her fiance. I can say that now.
Right.
I have a son, Josh, who went to Indiana for 1 year. Joelle is an IU graduate. She went to the Boys Jewish Studies program. Josh went to Indiana for a year. Then he made Aliyah to Israel, where he served in the tank unit for 3 years, and he now works for Nachman Shai, the Minister of Diaspora Affairs in the Israeli government, and he's finishing up his degree at Hebrew University. And my youngest, Micah, is a sophomore at University of Illinois in engineering.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So now tell us, where did you come from? Where's your experience in the Jewish field?
Well, my experience really starts with my PhD thesis, which was called Machers, Leadership and Fundraising in the Chicago Jewish Community.
which I didn't know how prescient it would be when I did that at the time, but it served me well. So I started off in academics. I was a professor at the University of Richmond in the Jepson School of Leadership Studies. And I transitioned from there actually into Federation work. I worked for the Federation for 1 year at the Richmond Jewish Federation in Virginia. And then I moved into synagogues. I was a synagogue executive director for 11 years in the Reform movement, 6 years 14 years, 6 years in Richmond, and then 8 years in Chicago at BJBE Synagogue. And while I was doing the synagogue work, I really learned a lot about fundraising and construction. I did 4 capital campaigns in the synagogue. In the synagogues, I built a programming building in Richmond, and I moved a congregation and built a whole big building back in Chicago. So I did a lot of that work. And then from there, I moved to an organization called the ARC.
Yes, tell us about the ARC, because I'm very familiar with it.
The ARC is an amazing organization. Yeah. It really is. It is a social service agency in Chicago dedicated strictly to the Jewish community. So all the clients there come from Jewish households. And we provide a whole array of services. We have a medical clinic with health and eye care and dental, as well as a free pharmacy. And then on the social service side, we have case management, a food pantry, a homeless shelter, vocational assistance, financial assistance, and a whole array of service there.
So, Mark, the Indianapolis Jewish community is one that has a proud history. And we've had some excellent leadership, both professional and lay. When this opportunity arose, what was it that attracted you to Indianapolis?
You know, as you just said, this is an amazing community. I love the state of Indiana. My father-in-law actually was born here, Howard Rice. I've yet to find anyone who knew him, but he was born and raised here. He went to IU for his undergraduate and for his medical degree. I sent 2 kids here, so this is an amazing community, and I knew that. What attracted me was really the opportunity to become a part of this community. It has an incredible staff. It has a stellar reputation in the country, and the lay leadership is just deeply, deeply involved, and the community is tremendously invested. I saw this as a great place where I could come in, make a difference, but also have a difference made on me.
Okay, good. So how do you see our federation today, coming in from the outside?
This federation is incredibly strong. I mean, it's in a place right now of centrality in the community where we're really, you used to say that federations are the umbrella organization for the community. And I don't think that's nearly as true as it used to be. But what is true still today is that it's the planner. It's the convener of the community. It's where everyone really can come together and feel like we're one community. And I think that's what I'm trying to bring back to Indianapolis, is this sense of unity as a community. I've been really focused on relationships a lot in my first few months here. Getting to know Evan Lueblein, getting to know Eric Kohler at the JCC, getting to know the rabbis and the other directors and the lay leadership across the city. It's an incredible array of people, very, very talented, very, very committed. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just pull everything together to get us all rowing in one direction again. There's a lot of work to be done. And I know that everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction.
Great, great. We're really excited that you're rolling up your sleeves and taking all of this on. Well, let's talk about some of the issues that we face. And before we come into strictly local issues, Mark, I think that there isn't, you mentioned that your family is from Ukraine, and there certainly isn't anything that's more prevalent going on in the world right now. Can you sort of address the intersection of what's going on in Ukraine and what we're doing in Indianapolis?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that makes Federation so important when you have an international crisis like what's going on in Ukraine is that the Federation is the organization, we're already here. We're already addressing Jewish communal needs. So when something happens internationally like this crisis, the Federation already has all the tools in place, already has the system in place, the people in place to put out the call for help, to pull everyone together and say, this is what's going on. There's the Jewish community, there's a larger national community and international community that needs our help right now. So within days of the whole thing happening, we were able to put out on social media, put out an email blast saying, please help the Ukrainian community. We've had over 200 people have already stepped up. Many stepped up right away before we had anything on our own page. The community had stepped up to make donations, 200 people so far. It is a $27 million effort by the all the Jewish federations across the country, across the continent really, who are helping, sending money over to help the Jews in the Ukraine, helping them locally in our own cities, helping them by lobbying Congress in DC, helping them on the ground in the Ukraine and in the surrounding countries where the refugees are coming out, and then also helping them in Israel, where Israel's taken over 1,000 refugees now and is in the process of resettling them in the country.
You know, I think that's really a source of pride for us in the Indianapolis Jewish community, is that whenever there's an issue like this, whether it's Ukraine or, God forbid, another Israel emergency fund, we in Indianapolis are really proud that we're able to step up and really participate in a meaningful way. So I appreciate you making that a priority, because it is a priority for us.
Yes.
Let's talk about engagement, because everybody wants to know, what is the Federation doing? How are we reaching out to people? And I want to specifically talk about engagement for adults, and then we can talk about engagements for our younger people.
You know, getting people involved in the community is indeed a top priority for us. These days, we all have so many identities that we're juggling in our lives. And I think that one of the dangers being Jewish in America today is that being Jewish can just become another one of those identities. You know, I'm a parent. I'm in, you know, scouting. I'm in a bowling league, and I'm Jewish. And being Jewish isn't that. You know, it's something very, very different. And I think that we're coming to terms with what does it mean to be Jewish in America today, to be a Jew in America today. And there are so many institutions in this city that are all together trying to help us answer that question, not just the Federation, but also our synagogues, the JCC, you know, Hooverwood right here, as well as JCRC and others, trying to figure out what does it mean to be engaged in the Jewish community today? Where does Judaism fit in our lives? Where do we find our place in this world as a Jew? And I think the Federation has a critical role in helping people to find their path and direct them along all the various institutions in our community to find their place.
Can you sort of talk to us a little bit about how the Federation is interacting with the younger generation?
Yeah, you know, we're doing several different ways. You know, first of all, we have our own teen programming, helping teach younger people how to become involved in the community, where to find their place, how to get involved philanthropically, how to get involved with the issues. You know, what are the issues that are important? We have one program called Yofi, Youth Philanthropy, which is not just about the giving of the money. It's really about them meeting one another, talking about what does philanthropy, what does tzedakah, what does all that mean to them? How do you incorporate that into your lives as you're emerging adults? And then also, how do you evaluate organizations? How do you know, what are the different organizations doing that we can make a difference? Because the message of youth philanthropy, the youth of all philanthropy, is that any one person can make a difference, that no gift is too big, no gift is too small, because collectively, it is what really matters.
So the Federation has always been multi-generational in that the leadership has involved people who have been around for a long time, people who have been around who are sort of in the pinnacle of their involvement, and then bringing a new generation involvement. Tell me about the involvement in Federation of the younger generation, the people who are in their 20s and 30s. How's that going?
It's going well. I think we have several programs that really encourage that, and I think it's a continuing challenge. You know, trying to get that generation transfer of wealth, the transfer of leadership. You know, because you always have this group of, and we still do it in Indianapolis. We have this tremendous group of seniors who are deeply involved and have been involved for themselves. And I go talk to them. They tell me about how their parents were involved and how their grandparents were involved, and their third generation, and their kids are still here. So we're looking at fifth and sixth generation of Indianapolis residents who are all involved, which is just tremendous. You know, getting the people who my generation in their 50s, getting people in their 40s, getting everyone involved is really critical, and which means making room and finding meaningful engagement opportunities, because every generation wants something different, wants to express themselves, wants to make this a part of their lives in a different way. And so for the 20s these days, we're trying to find those programs and those activities online. You know, obviously the pandemic has really made things very difficult in some ways, but also it's helped us to move engagement online, so people can talk to one another in ways that really weren't available before.
I wonder, could we talk for a minute about Jewish education? Because Jewish education has evolved in the United States in a way that probably even 30 years ago it was hard to foresee. Can you talk about the responsibility for Jewish education in Indianapolis? Because we no longer have the BJE functioning as the educational hub. Talk about Jewish education in Indianapolis.
It's a really good question. I just heard a statistic that they're estimating that only 20% of Jews under the age of 30 today will ever step foot into a synagogue. Now, I don't know if that's exactly true or not true, but the fact that it might be true is really concerning to me. Because Jewish education for so long was considered part of the synagogue, part of the BJE. And I think that if that's true, that so few young people today are going to step foot in a synagogue, that we've got a real problem. It's going to take an entire community effort to educate the younger generation, to educate this community as what does it mean to be a Jew in the world today. You know, it always goes back to identity. It all goes back to that engagement question of how do we move this community forward? How do we educate people about their heritage, about their religion, about their culture, so that we can carry that forward and really do something important? It needs an entire effort. The Federation has to play a role in providing some education where it's appropriate, under subjects where it's appropriate, but also providing the funding to other organizations, all of the organizations, be they JCC, synagogues, or organizations that are just now trying to find their path into Indianapolis, because it's going to take a very large effort to get the word out, whereas it didn't used to be that way. It used to be there was one place that you could go. Everyone knew. You go to your synagogue. You go to the BJE. That's where you get your Jewish education. Today, everything is so much more diverse than it's ever been before, and we need to stay on top of that. We need to make sure those opportunities are all still there, and we need to catch people where they are in order to make an impact.
Okay. Mark, let's turn to the future of the Federation. And we have a very unique campus here. When I have friends who come to Indianapolis and they see the campus, they're really kind of wowed by it. Can you talk about the campus and the future of the campus?
I think the campus is one of the real strengths of this community. I know that there's, everyone likes to talk about it. Where should it be? Is it still in the right place? And I don't think location is nearly as important as what's going on here. When I first came to Indianapolis, in the job search, and I was driven around here, I was just blown away. Only in a community of this size and in this kind of, where we had parents and grandparents and great-grandparents that were, had such forethought to buy this place and to place everything here. Not just what's on campus, of course, but what's, in the immediate vicinity around it. It's not just, when we talk about this campus, I'm not just talking about these acres. I'm talking about the synagogues and Hasten Academy that are all, collared to it. And I think that it's a location where you can come and I'm going to go to this area, and this is, and this is where I can find all those resources in the most traditional way. In the most physical way, is right here. I think the future of this campus is very bright. I think there's some work to be done. But, we're in a place right now, Craft Commons, where it's been done. And I think we can bring that vision to other parts of this community. I know that's one of our visions for the Federation, is to kind of re-energize the community around a campus. We're going to figure that out, in the months and years ahead. We're going to make that happen. It's a priority for me. I know it's a priority for the community. Really figuring out, where should we be? How should we be organized? What should the structure look like? Who should be involved? And so we can move it forward.
One of the things that has sort of evolved over time is the relationship between the Federation and other Jewish organizations. Can you talk about how your vision of the collaboration between the Federation and other Jewish organizations in Indianapolis?
Yeah. One of the things that I know none of us want to see is a real duplication of effort. People are giving their hard-earned dollars, people are giving their valuable time, people are giving their energy, and no one wants to see other people doing what's already being done someplace else. So really, I think one of the responsibilities of all of us who are communal leaders is to figure out, what can we do? What's appropriate for JCC? What's appropriate for Hooverwood? What's appropriate for JFS? What's appropriate for JCRC and the synagogues and the schools? How do we move this organization, this community forward? So the relationships between everybody becomes what's absolutely critical. because it's not about organizations don't act, right? People act. So my first goal, as I said earlier, my first goal has been to get to know the different people and to make sure that we're convening all the people in a room, all the leaders in the room, lay and professional, to talk. To say how, what are our priorities? What can we do really to make a difference in this community?
Okay. Mark, we can't leave without talking about how to maximize the financial resource development for the Federation through the annual campaign, through planned giving, endowments, that kind of thing. And I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up that subject before we leave. And we're not ready to leave yet,
No.
but I don't want to miss it. Can you talk about that? Because it's important.
It is important. This community has been contributing, since the very beginning. It has a rich history of over 100 years. And throughout that time, this community has been very generously supporting all of its various organizations. What I'm seeing is that things kind of flattened out at some point. I think that people are just used to now, they get a call from their synagogue, they get a call from the Federation, can you support? They say, of course, I'm happy to support, I've been giving $10,000 a year, I've been giving $100 a year, whatever the figure is, just keep putting me down. I'm with you. That's what I want to give. That's, and I'm really proud to give it. And people have been saying that $100, that $1,000, whatever it is for a very long time. And that's just become their gift. And what I would ask people right now is, can you give a little bit more? $100 is an incredibly generous gift. $1,000 is an incredibly generous gift, but can it be $1,100? Can be, can be $118? Can be $200? How can we grow this community? The people who, a lot of people were really hurt by the pandemic. There's no question about that. I mean, people were really damaged in very serious and significant ways. But for other people who are able to have their job through the pandemic, people who have money, who are in investments, those people actually did okay. They came out of this pandemic maybe even stronger than they were financially, than when they went into it. Socially, that's another story. But financially, people maybe even better case. And I would ask, how can you then transfer that to the Federation, and not just the Federation, but to the entire community? Help your synagogue, help the JCC, help other institutions that you care about, help the Red Cross. But let's just help the organizations out there who are doing the work every day to make our community stronger, and to really bring people together in a way that's meaningful for all of us.
Yeah, we're kind of in a double whammy right now because the pandemic put demands on the resources of the Federation to reach out and help people who were hurting, who were in trouble during the pandemic, and the Federation stood up. The other part of that double whammy is that, unlike the past so many years where nobody really paid any attention to inflation, inflation really matters now. Yeah. And it's more expensive to run the programming that you have. It's more important. It's more difficult to hire people. And we're just living in a different world than we have for the last decade or so. So it's important that people realize that, because just like their businesses have to be responsive, I think the community needs to be responsive for the Federation as well.
And something we haven't talked about is who are the people the Federation is serving. And we have a lot of different purposes out there. We're supporting Israel and supporting the community and our institutions. But really, the core thing that federations were founded on was supporting the people who are the most vulnerable in our community. And the people who are vulnerable, sometimes you can see them. Sometimes, they live here in Hooverwood, or they're someplace where you can, where it's obvious who people are vulnerable. But a lot of times these days, you don't know who's vulnerable. People who are living in the suburbs, who maybe lost their job and haven't been able to catch on the pandemic. And especially now, you haven't even seen them in 2 years because everyone's been kind of shut up in their houses. Right. But they have financial needs. They're not able to pay their rent. They're not able to put food on their table. They're making choices between, should I send my 8th grader on their Washington, D.C. school trip, or should I, go on take a family vacation, or fix my car, or put gas in my car. And gas is so expensive these days. How can we serve the most vulnerable? And there are vulnerable people in the Jewish community. The stereotype of the Jewish community is that it's full of, wealthy, successful, highly educated people. And you can be highly educated. You could have gone to a great school, but you can still be financially vulnerable today. There's no, a good education is a path to a really good life, but it's not a guarantee of really good life. And there are people who are living in the suburbs today who are hurting. People in Carmel who really do need our help, and you don't see it. And we need to provide those services in a discreet and appropriate way so that we can get them the help that they need, that they deserve.
So Mark, share with us, what are the biggest challenges for the Federation over the next 5 years?
Well, what I think is right along these things, is along that path, I want to make one of my goals maybe to wipe out poverty in the Indianapolis Jewish community. I think we can do it. I think that our community is small enough and successful enough and integrated enough that with a little bit of effort, we can make sure that every Jew in Indianapolis, every Jewish household in Indianapolis has a secure place to live, has food to eat, and has a source of income. I think we can make sure that happens. So that's one of my goals. For the next 5 years, maybe it'll take a little bit longer than that, but I think it's possible. I don't think that most communities can say that, but I think Indianapolis can say that. I think that we want to energize our community financially. I think we want to re-energize our institutions to get everyone back to where they ought to be, to have meaningful programming, to have meaningful engagement opportunities so that our community can come back together and really do the things that it needs to do as a community to support one another in meaningful and joyous ways. I think that there can be a lot more joy going on than we see today.
Mark, one thing that you've talked about that I think is important to talk about with regard to the future and the present is security. Can you talk about security?
Yeah, security is it's a real issue for us. I've only been here 2 months, and we've already lived through a shooting at the JCC, Colleyville, and a whole lot of trainings. I think the shooting at the JCC, which was not hate related, thank God. It was just a random act of violence, shows that we really are all very vulnerable. We're all vulnerable in some important ways. It also really showed me the resiliency of this community. It made me very proud of this Indianapolis community when the very next morning, people were back in working out in the JCC gym. The morning after that, the ECC was full with parents dropping their kids off. Everyone saying, we're not going to let anything stop us. We're going to go forward. On the other hand, Colleyville, which really was an anti-Semitic act, where someone really targeted the synagogue because they were Jewish, because they thought the Jewish community could provide something, it's very, very scary. So on the one hand, we have, our identity as Jews comes from inside, saying, I'm going to step up and be Jewish. But what Colleyville reminds us is that identity can also come from the outside. Yeah. People saying, I don't care who you think you are. We're telling you, you're Jewish, you're the other, you're different. So there's security coming, really hitting us, security issues hitting us from a lot of angles. And I think one of the real important things that federations do is supporting the Secure Community Network, SCN. And the Secure Community Network, and we have people here in the community who are paid professional volunteers, real experts in this, trying to train the community. How do you act in a situation? How can we make ourselves safe? How can we make our institutions safe? How can we act safe? Really to approach all of these challenges together, because unfortunately security is a very real issue for us every day.
Right, and I actually took the Zoom training for Grant Mendenhall last week, and I would encourage everybody to take it. I was particularly impressed by the rabbi in Collinville, who said that training is what he felt saved his life.
That's right.
So that's what inspired me to listen to the training, and I thought it was really, really well done.
It's a lesson, unfortunately, we all need to have today in today's world.
So to sort of end this very pleasant discussion with you, Mark, can you tell us what is it that the community can do to help you do your job better?
This community's been so wonderful and welcoming. I mean, I just want to thank everybody for the warm welcome that I've received. It's been really, really pretty extraordinary. What can you do to help? There are a lot of things. I think, first of all, we can continue to be nice to each other. I think that's a good thing. I think that people can follow us on social media. So much of the conversation today happens on social media. So just, going to various outlets, sharing and liking different stories, being active, becoming a part of the conversation is a really important aspect. I think contributing to the community, giving of your time, giving of your wisdom to the community, and then of course supporting the Federation and all of our efforts in order to, to increase the resources of this community is important. And I think just, giving me a call. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk. And if it's not just me, if you're not comfortable talking to me, call your rabbi, call anyone who works at your synagogue, call any of my partners across the community, call any of my colleagues at the Federation. We're all here. This is what we do. We want to hear from you. We want to add your voice to the conversation. because it's all about what we're doing right now. Is everything is for the Jewish community. It's just to make us stronger and better. So thank you, everybody.
Mark, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
We all appreciate it. And again, mazel tov on your daughter.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everyone. I want to personally thank Hooverwood Living for the use of their newest assisted living facility. You saw the lovely reception area and Craft Commons, so we truly appreciate that. Also, again, I want to thank Irwin Levin and Mark for taking time to put that together. That was a lovely and informative, I know you're laughing, but it's okay. But now we have an opportunity for everybody to enter their questions. I've got a few here to get us started, but please take a moment, enter into the chat, send questions. We've got Gigi waiting for us. I'm beginning to sound like an old telephone. All right, Mark, here's our first question. What do you plan to focus on in your first 6 months?
6 months. Well, the first few months have been spent listening, and I continue to do that. I have lunches and coffees almost every day, and I'd love to have more. So please, reach out. I'd love to meet with you. Love to meet with everybody. But I think where after that, I think where it's really boiling down to is three things. The first is relationships, which I've talked about several times, but I think it can't be overstated how important these are. Organizations don't run communities, people run communities. So forming those relationships, deepening those relationships, not just one meet coffee, but 2, 3, 4 dozen coffees. The second thing is leadership. This is a community with a very, very deep bench in leadership, and there are a lot of people to get to know, and there's a lot of work to be done to really energize and mobilize and organize and for me to figure it out and to get people, get the right people, all the right people on the bus and get everyone in the right seat, both on the staff side, the federation staff and on leadership on the federation staff, and then of course on the lay side, on the board side, and on all the volunteers. So I think relationships and leadership, and the third one are the fiscal issues. There are some fiscal issues that really need some immediate attention. Annual campaign and endowment among them. What can we do to really jumpstart our campaign? I mentioned that in the interview, but it bears repeating that the federation, if it's known for anything, it's known for being really the community campaign. So what can we do to increase that campaign, to get it into some to new places? Because it's not just about raising the money, it's what the money can do once we raise it. Being able to funnel that money to our community partners so that we can have more programming. And the purpose of having more programming is to increase our support for Israel, increase our support for the people who are the most vulnerable in our community. There are people who just really need our help, get our kids educated, really bring this community together. And then also to increase our endowments. Our endowments really are the lifeblood over the long term in those difficult times. When we have COVID, we can rely on the endowments to keep us going forward. So those are my priorities in the shortest term.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So while you and I were watching the video, a text came in that basically informed us of some new anti-Semitic issues that are arising. And it seems like it's every day in the news these days. So what do you see as the role of the Federation in terms of this whole security culture, and what can we do to help in that arena?
I think, unfortunately, security has become a critical role for federations. I think as the organizing body for the community, this is where we really step up and have a deep responsibility. It's funny, just earlier today in this very room that we're sitting in right now, there were about 30 people sitting around the conference table, including 10 police officers from the region, a lot of the JCC staff, a lot of the Federation staff, everyone who was here on that day a few weeks ago on that Saturday when there was the shooting here in the building, doing a debrief of what we learned, what we could do better on that day. Something that was really good to hear is the police said we did everything as well as could be done in those early minutes. Within 5 minutes, the police were notified. Within 5 minutes, the police knew that the assailant had left the building, and so that it wasn't a active shooter situation where we had to worry about the safety of the people inside the buildings. The police could come in and deal with the people who had been injured, not worry about clearing out the building because we were already doing that in a safe and organized way. That they were already, within 20 minutes, they were looking at the video cameras, they had access to the building, the officers were here, they were in charge, our leadership was here on site. And that's because we've been working on this for so many years. This doesn't happen by accident. It happens only because we prepare for it and we're trained for it, and not just at the senior leadership, not just at the lay leadership, but everybody. You know, one of the real stars of the day was the front desk people, you know,
Yes.
doing the welcoming desk at the JCC, who were absolutely critical to making sure that we were responded to correctly. They're the ones that called 911. They're the ones that the people saw when they first walked in the building that helped everything. So, you know, dealing with things on a day-by-day basis. The Federation system has put together a secure community network, which is a national system that we're a part of, which pulls together all the community's resources, and so that every community doesn't have to reinvent the wheel on security, that we can have a national person and regional people to really guide us through, to provide additional funding, to get some matching grants. We just found out that we're going to apply for a matching grant for the coming year, which will help us to increase our presence. And because of where we are in Indianapolis, and because we're the Indianapolis Federation, we don't have the luxury of just worrying about our city limits. There are a lot of communities in Indianapolis, Jewish communities in Indianapolis, that don't have the benefit of a federation. And so our security, our SCN network really does look to those other communities in central Indiana, you know, to the campus in Bloomington and the campus in West Lafayette, other communities that have significant populations or smaller synagogues. And then really what's our responsibility for Southern Indiana and also Northern Indiana and the entire state. So we're really looking at this in a much more holistic effort than we do with most other services that we provide. We really try and take care of the entire state as best we can as appropriate. So yeah, there's a lot.
There is
And
a lot.
then of course there's also JCRC. Oh, by the way, this amazing organization that's existed for a very long time that you're past president of, and so many of our best leaders have come through JCRC and are still there, and they play a critical role with anti-Semitism and with security as well.
Yes, well, thank you. Matter of fact, I was here on the Sunday morning after that Saturday afternoon event, and I made a point of stopping by the desk and thanking the people at the desk. They very quietly responded and said, "Thank you very much for acknowledging me." So it does make a difference, by the way. So education, you talked a little bit about it in the film. We've talked a little bit about it. To me, education is a lifelong commitment. Talk to me a little bit about your perspective on Jewish education. I know you did a little bit in the film, but try to expand a little bit on it if you could, please.
Sure. I think when we talk about Jewish education, it breaks down into two sides. There's the formal Jewish education and the informal Jewish education. So on formal, you know, we're very lucky. We have Hastings Hebrew Academy here as a day school, which I think is absolutely critical for a community the size of Indianapolis to have a day school. I think that's something that it's kind of our responsibility as the organized community to make sure that we maintain, which gives just a first-class education. I know that your grandkids are students at the day school, as are, you know, many of our leaders have their kids there. I used to have their kids there or educated there themselves. We have the synagogues that have their schools, which are absolutely critical and vital. They have a formal education, teach Hebrew, teach history to our youth with a curriculum, which is something that you only get at a formal school. And then we have our informal education, which is just as which is also important. And it's more accessible for a lot of people because it's just kind of there. But at the JCC, there are a lot of classes and programs for kids and for adults. At the JCC camps, there's education. I know that, you know, JCC is always looking at every activity that they run. They say, how can we add a Jewish element to this program and activity? And every time they do that, that's education. You know, there's BBYO and there are various youth groups around the community who also are always looking, how can we educate the people who are participating. There are missions that we run. The Federation has a mission going right after Passover to Israel, which always has an education component to it. Then there are speakers. Everyone's bringing in speakers. And they're wonderful and they're amazing and they're engaging. And that's how we learn about, you know, all sorts of different things. So it's really, there's an awful lot to avail yourself of. And I'm sure that everyone will tell you don't have to belong to that institution necessarily to go to it. And we all kind of, that's happening in a place that isn't mine. And, you know, we're all involved there.
Yes, well, thank you. You know, it's interesting. I can tell you that I was just thinking about this in my family, my extended family, we're utilizing every single one of the services of this, you know, between the JCC, the Federation, Hooverwood, and the Houston Hebrew Academy. And I'm thinking to myself, that's quite a coincidence, let's put it that way. Yeah, so thank you, appreciate that. Okay, engagement. Let's focus on engagement for a minute. It is a term that sometimes is poorly defined.
Don't ask me to define.
I'm not going to ask you to define it. But talk to me about where you see some examples of engagement as opposed to education. Maybe that's where I'm confused a little bit sometimes.
Well, I think, one easy example is Hillel. We support a lot of Hillels around the state. I met yesterday with Rabbi Sue from IU. My kids went, so special connection with Rabbi Sue. I think that Hillels engage college students. I think that go there even though your mom told you to go. It's one of my favorite signs that I saw outside of the Hillel once. It's a place where Jewish people can go to be Jewish, to hold and to know that when you're there, you're going to interact with a community that has some affinity to you, that just feels like home. So I think that's important. And after college, of course, there's Moishapad, which we also support, which is a program for young adults, in their first job, in their 20s, really just to help people, again, find community, make matches, hopefully, and to really engage, with their Jewish community. And I think as we get older, it's going back to, JCCs and TH programs like that.
Can you give me an example? And thank you very much for that. Give me an example of how you envision shared services or just the relationships between the agencies in terms of where we might begin to make some improvements.
Well, I think, it goes back to the question about this campus.
About the campus.
Which is really, really extraordinary. I know that when I first drove around the campus and I saw it, but only in a place like Indianapolis, which is really one of the real richness and strengths of intermediate-sized communities like ours, that we can have an institution like this where we do share so many services, and that saves us, in countless ways, and it connects us in even more ways. So I think, we share services in security. We share services in being able to relate to one another. So
Information technology and
that's right.
some of the other areas.
The things that we support,
That's right.
And go down our budget. You see where they are. But I think more than just that, I would like to see some taking advantage of some of the less obvious things that I think we could do maybe even a little bit better on, or maybe we already do them and I just haven't been here long enough to know that we're doing them already. The therapy pools at the JCC could be used by people who are at JFS or Hooverwood, really having, food services, supporting the different aspects of our campus. I know that on Purim, the kids, did the parade coming around and really, helps, brightens the day of the Federation staff, because the kids from the Purim are walking around in their costumes on that day. And every day when I walk around, it's always, great when you see those little kids from moving around. So I think that there's a whole lot of interconnection that we could find and strengthen and encourage between our facility, between our different institutions who are all located on the same campus.
Well, we are blessed to have some dynamic leadership on this campus. I mean, I think someone was mentioning recently to us that, we actually have 4 relatively young, not in terms of age, well, all right, I'll compliment you with young leaders in this community, all with dynamic personalities, all with clear visions. And yet what does my heart good is to see that we're talking about being a team. We're talking about campus in terms of a global campus mission. We're talking about, the things that you're beginning to twist and to modify in terms of our talking points, which I think is so wonderful. So I thank you.
And I want to also say, we have some established leadership who have been on this campus for a long time who are also phenomenal. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble if we don't say,
No, we're not.
people. No, we have some people who have been here for a very, very long time, who have really been the cornerstone of this community for a long time, and who are still innovating and still going strong and making sure that we're going together.
And yet I'll give you one last observation. You were talking before about the security. I know we got a question here, so I'm going to pause for a second. We need to talk about
Ukrainian results. Oh, results. Okay.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
How we've been on Ukraine. It's really been quite extraordinary. 270 families have now contributed on behalf of the Indianapolis community towards supporting the crisis in Ukraine. We've raised $175,000 thereabouts, and yes, there are some very large gifts. The Glick family, the Simon family made a matching gift that was matched within hours. I mean, really, within hours, it was $50,000 and that came in. There's another $40,000 gift that came in anonymously in our community. But aside from those large gifts, there is tens and tens of thousands of gifts that came in, not in $18 and $100 and $200 at a time. I'm being told by my colleagues that it really is one of the largest efforts that we've seen, the largest responses we've seen to a special campaign in a very, very long time.
Sure.
Perhaps even in their tenure, in the span of their tenure here. Other than the money that we raised to support the institutions during the COVID crisis, is probably one of the largest real showings, certainly from the broad community. And so thank you to all of you for responding. Because it's a need and it's still ongoing. So I'm sure if it keeps going on much longer, we're going to redouble our effort and say, can we keep going?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you. We have time for another question or two if people have any, but if not, I've been talking with Mark pretty, significantly since about 4:30 this afternoon. So the poor guy's worn out. Mark, I want to thank you very much. First of all, for coming to the community, for giving us even a look, which we truly appreciate, for saying yes. And, we have great expectations and we know you're going to be able to achieve them.
Thank you, Leslie. And thanks to all of you. And I meant that when I said, give me a call or flip me an email, and let me know you want to talk, because there's nothing I really like more than to hear your perspective, to share that perspective with our leadership. And to move this committee forward, because that's what we all want, is really to move past it in this post-pandemic age, let's hope, into the future.
Right. And which gives me a segue into saying that there's a pretty good chance that our next board meeting will be in person. Mark my words, folks. All right. Well, again, thank you, everyone. This evening, we truly appreciate everything you've done. This has been recorded to the best of my knowledge. Mark, do you want to just say a few closing words?
I have nothing to say other than thank everybody.
Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your evening.